If you've ever been on the receiving end of verbal abuse, you know how devastating it is and how it chips away at your self esteem. But what if you could reduce the number of outbursts or even eliminate them altogether? It sounds impossible, I know, but I've seen it happen. And in today's episode, we'll explore what victims of verbal abuse have done to create peace, connection, and even playfulness in their relationship so that you can experiment to see if it works for you too. Ready to see for yourself if you have the power to make your marriage safe and peaceful? Let's dive in. I'm Laura Doyle, New York Times bestselling author and marriage mentor, and I was the perfect wife until I got married. This is the Empowered Wife podcast, where real women share exactly what they said and did to make their hopeless marriages playful and passionate. If you've been on the receiving end of a rageaholic's repeated outbursts, you know how devastating it is to be verbally abused. You know how demeaning and cruel and destructive it is to your self-esteem. It's the worst. When that hurtful scenario keeps recurring, it seems like the only sane thing to do is to get away from it, or maybe get away from that person, at least temporarily, if not permanently. But when that person is your husband, someone that you've built a life with and sworn to love, honor, and respect and have children with, it's not so easy to just tear up your family. But you don't want to live with ongoing verbal abuse either. I mean, nobody should live that way. It's a tough predicament. But what if you could reduce the number of blowups? What if they dwindled down to hardly ever or even none at all? I wouldn't have believed that that was possible if I hadn't seen it for myself. But now that I've also witnessed thousands of other women who have used the connection framework to make their relationships peaceful, even playful, and have that outcome in their marriages, I'm a believer. You don't have to take my word for it, though. You can see for yourself by experimenting with it in your own relationship. You know, sometimes victims of verbal abuse make one or two common mistakes that make verbal abuse worse. It's shocking because I remember feeling so hopeless and helpless about this in my marriage. So it was offensive to me that the idea that I was making any mistakes besides the mistake of marrying the wrong guy. But I was making these two mistakes that were all within my control to fix. Here they are. Number one is withholding oxygen. I was withholding oxygen from my husband. And by that, I mean I was being disrespectful to my husband. And since respect is like oxygen to men, it's a pretty serious threat, even if you don't know that that's what you're doing when you're disrespectful. When I finally learned what respect looks like to men, including my husband, it was a shocker. I described 3 ways to be respectful to your husband in episode number 240. So go check that out if you're wondering what I'm talking about. And if you would have asked me early on if I was respectful to my man, I would have nodded vigorously and said, yes. Oh, yes, of course I am. Except for the way he dresses and the way he eats. And also, he doesn't make that much money. So, as I'm sure you've noticed, I wasn't respectful at all. Clearly, I had no idea what respect meant, but I thought I did. I didn't even realize that I had something to learn because I'd been hearing about respect in marriage and how wives should respect their husbands for my whole life. And I assumed I was understanding what that meant and that I was doing it. I had no idea I was part of the problem. I thought I just married a jerk. I figured he had an anger problem and he needed to work on it for our relationship to improve. Until he did, I was getting hurt a lot. And it was chipping away at my self-confidence and it was chipping away at my joy. And he wasn't even working on getting better about his verbal abuse, which is why divorce was looking like my best option. What I didn't realize is that my disrespect was also hurting his self confidence and his joy. It made him defensive. No one is at their best when they're defensive. In fact, people often seem like hostile, vicious donkeys when they're defensive. Now, to my husband, my disrespect was devastating. The pain of knowing that the woman who knows him best in the whole world doesn't think much of him was too much to bear. His defense was to be mean back. That's not right and it's not fair, but it is human. Abby had the same experience. She explained that because she wanted to help her husband be healthy, she told him how bad it was for him to drink soda and that he needed to stop, even though he loved drinking soda. His response to her concerned comments was to scream at her that she didn't matter, what she said didn't matter, and that she should shut the bleep up. She wanted to know what to do about his verbal abuse. But right there in the question to me is the part where she said, I know better than you, and you're making a terrible, ignorant choice by drinking soda, you incompetent idiot. Now, of course, those aren't the words that she used, but that's how her disrespect landed on her husband's ears. And that sounds pretty abusive once it's translated, doesn't it? Who wouldn't be defensive? If your man's hostility seems to come from out of nowhere, it may also be his inappropriate response to feeling disrespected. That's what it turned out to be in my case, and so many others I've witnessed as a relationship coach. It may not be the same in your situation. I mean, maybe you're not disrespectful, or maybe that has nothing to do with why your man is verbally abusive. But here's another mistake I made that could apply to your situation. Number two is responding to his verbal abuse. It could be, and it often is, that your man's just in a foul mood and he gets some kind of crazy release from unleashing a truckload of hurtful words on you because you happen to be there. When that happens, it's scary. And as a mere mortal woman, you feel defensive and you feel hurt and scared. You could argue with him and set the record straight, and then it could escalate and end up being a huge blow up. That's what I used to do. My first reaction was to want to hit him back, to be mean to him, to show him, you hit me, so I'm hitting you, just like a 2-year-old. And that's what I did at first. I'm not proud to say that, but it never ever got me an apology or peace or a feeling of safety in my marriage. It didn't improve things at all. And when I was hitting back, I wasn't tending to myself because I was busy counterattacking. I thought hurting him back would make him stop hurting me. But it only led to a bigger fight that hurt us both even more. Now, maybe that's not what you do. Maybe you don't say a word. You clam up and you clench your jaw as he berates you, and maybe tears just run down your cheeks, but you just suck it up and hope that it passes, which is so scary and painful. Maybe whether you speak or not, the hurtful words keep coming. What then? It's as though he's in charge of whether you're safe or not, and you can't control him, and that makes you a victim. Nobody wants to be a victim. So here's how to stop being a victim. Suffering with verbal abuse is no way to live. No one deserves that, and it's certainly not your fault. But it is your responsibility to make yourself safe. And it's within your power. And that doesn't mean that you have to leave the relationship, although you are the expert on your own life and you always have that option. What if instead, though, you stopped suffering from verbal abuse because you took care of you? That's how Rebecca described her experience of going from saving getaway money to escape her marriage, to feeling like her marriage is safe and happy and her husband can't do enough to delight her. In the beginning, she said she made so many sacrifices to make her husband happy. And years later, she was exhausted and resentful. Sacrificing herself to make him happy wasn't working. He wasn't happy, and she had nothing left to give. And she was always walking on eggshells, trying to make him happy so she could feel okay, but she didn't feel safe in her own home. She felt like a victim because her husband was always so angry. And what she learned about the 6 intimacy skills was that she had never honored herself in that relationship. She had not asked herself, how do I feel and what do I want? So she had an epiphany that was on her to figure out. But it was scary to start honoring her desires because she was afraid that they would conflict with his desires and then her marriage would have to end. Like, he liked to sail, take long sailing trips around the world, and being on a boat made her sick. So how was that ever going to get resolved? So she started out very small, expressing her desires in a way that inspires. Like, she said, I would love pretty string lights on the roof. And her husband made that happen. And then she said, I would love stronger Wi-Fi for my Zoom meetings. And he got that fixed right away, jumped right on it. Now, instead of anticipating that he was going to fight her, she got to the place where she expected him to respond positively to her desires. And she saw that he was willing to sacrifice to make her happy, and that the issues they had been having were because she had lost her voice. She got so scared of him during that time, she had stopped listening to him until she realized that she could listen to him and also still have her desires without causing a fight, without causing a verbal outburst from him. And when she did that, when she started just listening to him and still honoring her desires, he made arrangements for himself to sail to French Polynesia. And then he made arrangements for her to fly there to meet him for a romantic getaway. Now, they both felt safer around each other, and she's no longer planning to escape from her happy marriage, her once verbally abusive, but now happy marriage. She tells the whole story in episode number 50 of the Empowered Wife podcast. And my takeaway from Rebecca's inspiring story is that making yourself safe from verbal abuse is an inside job that comes from practicing the 6 intimacy skills with a coach and a supportive community. And by the way, you can get an overview of those 6 intimacy skills by downloading the Adored Wife Roadmap for free at lauradoyle.org. Thousands of women have used the 6 intimacy skills to make their marriages playful and passionate. I know there are plenty of marriage experts who will tell you that you have to leave if you're in a verbally abusive relationship. That's something you might hear from friends and family also. It's very common advice, and it's always an option to leave. Only you know what's best for you and for your family. But since you're listening to this podcast right now, I have a feeling that's not what you really want. Maybe you just need some hope, like Rebecca did, that instead of escaping your marriage, you can make it peaceful and safe and playful and passionate. It takes a lot of courage to even try. But if your desire is to stop the verbal abuse in your marriage, I'm standing for you to have everything you want to make your marriage last and thrive. If you loved hearing these tips about how I transformed my struggling marriage into one that's playful and passionate, subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Get the inspiration and the ideas and the tips that you need to create a marriage where you feel desired, taken care of, and special. On next week's podcast, my guest is going to share about how she fixed her marriage to a neurodiverse husband. It's pretty juicy. And in the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is that I read that if you walk at least 75 minutes a week, it lowers the chances of early death. So I guess that means that if you walk a whole bunch, that you die after lunch. For more on how to make your marriage playful and passionate without his conscious effort, even if it seems hopeless right now, check this out.